Hello, my name is Andrej and you're watching the Serbian History Games channel. This will be a first in the series of videos on World War II in Yugoslavia, compared to which Game of Thrones looks like a picnic. Now, this video series is inspired by Lindy Bage's video on World War II in Yugoslavia, and you can find the link down below. I'm a huge fan of Lindy Bage, and I think he did a solid. He basically repeated the information from the standard versions of events and as found on Wikipedia. And he very properly noted that the situation was indeed more complex than that. Of course, it was more complex than that, and I hope to provide more additional in-depth information, but it is not just that. The fact of the matter is that I'm not a huge fan of the standard version of events, which I personally describe as the British/communist version of events, well, which are not completely the same, but are mutually supportive, since the British basically installed communism in Yugoslavia. Now, the standard version of events would very shortly go something like this. There was this Yugoslavia, and after France fell, it was pressured to join the Axis Pact. Its government caved in, but there was a popular revolution and an army coup, and they were against the pact, and the Germans and the Italians properly invaded and conquered Yugoslavia, brought with them some very nasty pieces of work, which were the Croatian Ustaše, and there were some massacres of Serbs and Jews and whatnot, and very soon a resistance movement sprang up led by army officers, and they were called the Chetniks, and soon afterwards another resistance movement sprang up, a communist resistance led by Tito. And well, these resistance movements really did not get along very nicely. There was this reprisal policy of the Germans for 100 Serbs were one German killed, and well, basically the Chetniks very soon collaborated with the Germans and whatnot. So the British missions, which were with the Chetniks, recognized that the Partisans were actually fighting the Germans, and very soon the British and the Americans supported the Partisans, and the Partisans number rose up to 300,000. Now, they did not actually liberate the country. Actually, there were some Soviet tanks involved, which helped. But the Partisans did manage to kick out the Germans from the country and defeat all the local German cooperators, and they installed Tito as the lifelong president, very properly, because they were the part of a victorious Allied coalition. And yes, there was some red terror involved, but I mean, what can you do? I mean, since Tito was a left-wing dictator, he basically gets a free pass. Now, this is the standard version of events, as was taught to me in school, because I was born and raised in Belgrade in what was then Yugoslavia. The version itself did not make complete sense. I mean, I had some questions, you know, some inconsistencies, and also I knew some people that actually lived through the war who also pointed out some additional inconsistencies. And basically, after years and years of studying history, well, I don't really buy into this version. Why do I have a problem with this version? Well, let me retell this version, but with some change names, events, and peoples, so I can more easily relate to you why I find this version not very plausible. Now, it won't be Yugoslavia, it will be Britain. It won't be the Serbs, it would be English. It won't be the Croats, Bosniaks, and so on. It would be the Irish and Scots. There won't be the British missions, it will be American missions. But, you know, basic information will stay the same. France falls in 1940, and the British government decides that, you know, it's not worth fighting anymore, and they want to make a peace with Germany. But the British army officers and the English people in London decide that they will have none of this, and they make a huge popular revolution against this pact with Germany, and they overthrew the government. So the Germans and Italians managed to use this commotion to invade Great Britain and to take London and most of England. And as soon as this happens, the North, the Irish and the Scots, they decide for the Axis, and the Axis rewards them with a huge chunk of England and makes a independent state of Ireland. And basically the Germans and Italians divide up the country between their own occupation zones. Now, very soon when this happens, there are some, words of massacres of English in the north, and, the Germans and Italians bring with them some, nasty people that actually take over this new independent state in the north. And a resistance movement springs up, and it's actually the Royal Army officers which simply go underground and form a resistance movement around this General Montgomery person. So since there are words of massacres in the north, Montgomery focuses his attention there and does not immediately call for a uprising in the south of the country, among other things because the Germans decide they will shoot 100 Englishmen for every German killed and 50 Englishmen for every German wounded. So you can do the math. So in the meantime, Germans invade Soviet Union and a new resistance movement springs up. They are the British Communist Partisans, and they're led by this enigmatic and shadowy person who seems to be of Irish extraction but has a very thick Russian accent. Now, these new communist partisans want to start the rebellion now, if not even sooner, and they want to start the rebellion down south in England because the English are, they're most willing to fight the Germans. Now, when the rebellion does start, it's led by both the British Home Army, led by Montgomery, and by the British partisans. And actually, when a city is liberated, the British partisans proclaim a republic. I don't know how well this goes down with the people. And, they managed to hit some Germans, but the Germans start to retaliate, and they're very nasty. And very soon, Montgomery decided the fight is not worth anymore because there are like some 100,000 Englishmen being killed at the point. And, very soon the two resistance movements start to fight amongst each other. And, the American missions that are with Montgomery, because he is like the member of the Royal Army, and so he's the official resistance. Well, these American missions decide that Montgomery is being too focused on the north. He is being too focused protecting the English and fighting with this new independent state of Ireland, Scotland, whatever, and that the communist partisans are actually the ones that are focused fighting the Germans. Though it should be noted that the communist partisans are located in the Italian zone, and that the American missions are actually with Montgomery, so they don't really have first-hand knowledge of what the partisans are doing. But the American missions decide it's it, and the Americans start supporting the communist partisans, and the communist partisans number skyrockets to about 1 million, and they don't actually liberate Great Britain. They had to wait for some Soviet tanks to land and liberate London, but afterwards they managed to liberate the country, and their leader is very properly installed as a president for life in a new communist Great Britain. So how does this version sound? Personally, I think there is a couple of pink elephants that are roaming around that nobody wants to notice. For instance, there is this, relatively huge issue of, Englishmen being killed by this new independent state, and, there is massacres going on daily. So, this is something that might, be important for the overall calculation. And also the fact that, the Germans are very keen to make reprisals. So actually, if you actually do destroy a German division in combat, which is almost impossible for guerrillas, but if they actually did it, that would mean about 1 million English casualties. Also, there is this fact that Montgomery is actually an officer of the regular British Army, while the other guys are communist partisans, and the Americans are actually supporting a communist takeover in a friendly country, and things like that. Now, what I propose to do is to make a series of videos on what happened in Yugoslavia with a little bit more in-depth information, and you make your own conclusions. The next video in the series will be an introduction on how Yugoslavia was actually created, on how it went to war with the Axis, and a story about the people that is completely and utterly insane. Stay tuned.